Hi, everybody. This is Pastor Joshua Sullivan at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kerrville, Texas. Thanks for joining us for another episode of ATP Ask the Pastor. Today's question is about dinosaurs. Well, it's a bit more complex than that. Dead dinosaurs. Someone writes in, "Dear Pastor, I was wondering, if the Earth is only a couple thousand years old, how do you explain the million-year-old fossils?" Well, easy. Those fossils aren't really a million years old. Now, being in modern America, evolutionary thought rules the day. It is the new mythology about our origins that's sprung up ever since the Enlightenment declared that God is dead. You can't go into a museum, you can't watch a movie or a television show most of the time without being inundated with the idea that fossils are millions upon millions of years old. What they're not telling you, though, in the midst of all of these certain facts that they're giving you, is that there are a whole lot of assumptions behind those claims of certainty, assumptions which are all predicated on the belief that evolution is already proven fact. So let's talk fossils. How are they dated? Generally, there's two ways of dating fossils. The first is relative dating. This means that when a fossil is found in a certain rock strata, a certain layer of rocks, that fossil is assumed to be the same date as the rocks are dated then. Now, since most scientists are going to be working with the assumption that there was not a worldwide flood, in spite of even extra biblical evidence contrariwise, they believe that each rock layer is laid sequential, so that fossils found closer to the soil, closer to where you and I walk and live, those will be younger than fossils found deeper. However, there have been fossils that have challenged that assumption. We're not going to talk a whole lot about those right now, though you can look that up on websites. Aside from relative dating, though, there is absolute dating. And that's where, it's just what it sounds like. It's used to get the absolute or the precise date of what a fossil is. So fossils can be dated themselves. Most likely they're going to be dating the rocks that the fossils come in, just so they can preserve more of the fossil itself. Absolute dating, from what I've read, mostly relies upon something like radiometric dating. And so that's the one I know the most about. So that's the one we'll talk about. Radiometric dating can be used to find the absolute age of the fossil of the rock. Radiometric dating, what it does is it measures the amount of decaying radioactive isotope found in the rock. So radioactive isotopes decay into non-radioactive, more stable material in the course of time. So by measuring the amount of radioactive material and observing how quickly it decays into its stable form, then using that, what people will do is they will extrapolate retroactively, meaning back in time. If this is the rate, if it takes this long for this isotope to decay this much, then we can go back in time and say, therefore, this is when that rock or fossil had no radioactive element in it. Therefore, it must be that old then. This is all based upon this theory, or rather this principle of uniformity. And this is the big deal when it comes to dating fossils and dating rocks. The principle of uniformity comes into play. The principle of uniformity states, believes that decay rates, which we can observe right now, are uniform throughout history. This means that the rate of decay that we observe, that we empirically see now, that isotope is decaying at the same rate all throughout the course of history, and then that rate of decay has never changed due to environmental factors then. That's a big presupposition, and it's a presupposition that we'll always be unable to prove them. We just don't know for sure that isotopes decay at the same rate within different conditions then. If they have been decaying at that uniform rate that we can observe, and if we can extrapolate that back, then sure, those rocks and fossils are billions upon billions of years old. But if radiometric dating, if decay of these isotopes does change due to environmental factors, then radiometric dating really does us no good in determining the age of rocks and fossils then. Now, some people will also bring up carbon-14 at this point. Carbon-14 isn't generally used on fossils because carbon-14 has a half-life of, I think, somewhere around 50,000 years. Then I think it's like 57 30 or something like that. But let's just round down. It has a half-life of 50,000 years, which means that carbon-14 dating can't get you into the millions upon millions of years. It can only date something that we think is maybe 100,000 years old at most then. So there's a catch, though, with this whole carbon-14 thing. In things that we found, in fossils that we've found, like wood, coal, and even some dinosaur fossils, dinosaur remains, there are still detectable amounts of carbon-14. So things that are in these rock strata, which we assume are, a billion, 500 billion, whatever years old, there are pieces of stuff that still have carbon-14 in them. And so if things from that rock strata, or if those fossils are really, let's just take a number, 50 billion years old, there should be no discernible, no detectable carbon-14 in them. So again, if the rate of decay is uniform in carbon-14, just as is in radiometric dating, then those fossils are really not a million or billions of years old, because you shouldn't be able to detect any carbon-14 in them. Now, another example that someone recently told me about, and I had to look this up, was T-Rex fossils. This really started happening, or I think a paper was published in 1977. T-Rex fossils that had been dated as being 68 million years old, they found soft tissue in those fossils then. Now, here's the thing. If those remains are actually 68 million years old, there is no reason why soft tissue should still be there. It shouldn't be taking this long to decay then. Scientists have done experiments in the lab to prove that soft tissue can survive under similar circumstances for up to 2 years. Now, here's the big assumption then. Here's the principle of uniformity at work. If we can get soft tissue to remain under similar conditions for 2 years, therefore, that explains why soft tissue can exist in fossil remains that we date as 68 million years old. Again, you see the jump. This is a huge leap from 2 years in a lab to 68 million years. But it goes back to that idea, that principle of uniformity. As we see things right now, we assume that that is the way that it has always been. And again, we just can't know that for sure. There's other problems with these datings. If you're interested in this sort of stuff, what I would do is I would go to someplace like the Creation Science Institute. They have a great website with all sorts of articles. Some of them are geared more towards your layman. Other ones are geared more towards your more scientifically minded. But the Creation Science Institute has a bunch of good resources. And again, with a lot of these things, you can't prove that God created the heavens and the earth, as Genesis says. But you also can't prove that there was a singularity called the Big Bang or something like that, because by definition it's a singularity, and so you cannot reproduce it. And so this goes back to my opening comment there, as far as evolutionary thought is really almost a fanatical religion in and of itself. It has its dogmas which cannot be questioned. Those who do question them are ostracized. Those who do question evolutionary thought and theory are castigated publicly, etc. I can just imagine the emails I'm going to get, for this ATP as it is. But if you go to someplace like the Creation Science Institute, they'll have some good things as far as being able to say, look, there's a good amount of evidence that runs contrary to the prevailing view of evolution. And so when it comes across, or when it's portrayed as being absolute fact, that's clearly very far from the case. There's a lot of assumptions going on that they don't tell you about, and that even when you discover them, it's just like, well, yeah, we can trust that assumption, the end. And that's why I look at it and I say, there's a certain religious aspect to this then. When evidence is found that it runs contrary to that theory, it's easily dismissed, or it's explained away in a way that doesn't actually deal with the evidence. Because in a lot of this thinking, this entire evolutionary thought is based upon the idea that there is no God, there is no creator, there was no beginning of the world as we think about it, and so there really is no end as we think about it. And there's a whole lot of other things we could do with this. This is just kind of a quick smattering of how do we deal with fossils. So we get back to that simple answer of they're not really a million years old. The end. Thank you for your question. It's been a great experience for me to be able to do some research on this. I appreciate that. As for you and for anybody else, if you got a follow-up question on this or about something else, shoot me an email, atpholycross@gmail.com, and we'll get to you as soon as we're able. We'll see you next time.